Okay, so we're live here after the AP College Review class on longer fiction and drama and speaker and narrative perspective. I've already got some questions in the Remind feed, so when you come in, go ahead and say your name so I know that you're here, and I'll know that if you, I'll know you're here to get the answer to the question you put in Remind. I see 4 of you are in. The rest, come on in, introduce yourself, put your name in the live chat. Hello, Mariah. Does it still feel like nighttime to you? Hello, Maria. Hello, Happy Julian. Yes, and it's getting harder and harder to remember what day it is when so many things are upside down. But today is Wednesday. That's a good point, Julian. You say I thought today was B day. You know, as we're doing this, and we're doing something every day, you know, around 11 o'clock to kind of keep things regular. And I've had some people ask in Remind, do I need to do this activity since it's a B day? Everybody does everything. So as far as attendance, you know, you do the check-ins, but other than that, everybody does all the activities. All right, so we've got questions. Here's Dulce's question. She says, how can we trust our interpretation of the story when the narrator or speaker is unreliable? Excellent question. Well, looks like somebody wants to say hello here. Or that's Yingling, the other dog. Looks like she wants to go outside. So I'll be right back. All right, Alexis, good morning. Okay, so back to Dulce's question. How do we trust our interpretation of a story when the narrator or speaker is unreliable? Well, every day you hear stories from people. Maybe it's, maybe it's a friend of you telling something. Maybe you're hearing some news on the television. Maybe your parents are telling you something. Maybe anytime you get information, you have to decide how reliable is the source that you have. So how can we trust our interpretation? Interpretation really doesn't have anything to do with who the narrator is, because we have to decide as readers, listeners, viewers, do we trust the person talking to us? And if the answer is yes, then perhaps there's a little less critical thinking on our part. But if the answer is no, then we have to figure out, okay, well, what maybe happened in The Turn of the Screw, the story that they talk about in the lesson. You have a narrator who is in love with someone, and then you have the story being told, written down by a man who found some document somewhere, but that story was told by somebody who was in love with someone in the story, and they heard that story, and then they also, inside that, you have this governess, this tutor telling a story. So you've got all these things. Think about a story that you hear that's gone through 3 or 4 different people. By the time you hear that rumor that comes all the way around, it's likely changed. Maybe you played that game in elementary school called telephone, where one person would start whispering a word or phrase, and then it goes around the room and it gets distorted. So all we can do as the reader is think, okay, well, the governess here in the story, in the lesson, thinks she sees ghosts. Well, if you think you see ghosts, maybe your power of reason is a little less, is a little impaired, okay? And if in the way that she talks in the lesson, they broke down that extended quote, they showed all the commas, the places she stopped talking, she kind of changed direction. If you can't make a sentence that makes sense, then how reliable are you as a narrator? So then you have to decide, okay, what do I think that really happened? So then part of the interpretation becomes, okay, we have an unreliable narrator, so what does that tell us about the situation? The Turn of the Screw is a ghost story. So think about the ghost stories that you've read or heard. you don't really need a lot of help interpreting those. Instead, you're looking at, okay, what is being used to make this scary? What are we learning about the limits of the human mind when it comes to deciding what's real and what's not? So hopefully that answered your question a little bit. Let's see. Julian's question: could you provide some examples of finding a narrator? Okay, well, we talked about this a lot with The Great Gatsby. And we talked about the fact that Nick presents characters who don't have a whole lot of emotional depth, who don't bring much to the table as far as being people that seem emotionally involved. Everybody kind of seems like they're wandering around on Xanax in The Great Gatsby. And that could be true, but it also could be that we're seeing these characters through Nick's lens. And we talked about the fact that maybe coming back from World War I was traumatic for him. And so he is not able to emotionally engage with others yet. He's still got, mental, emotional PTSD. And perhaps he assumes that everybody else around him is just as emotionally dead as he is. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But we're seeing them through his eyes. We see the whole story through his eyes. I just finished another book called Native Son by Richard Wright. And there are very few realistic characters in that story. But the point of Native Son isn't really the story. The point is to make the point. And the theme that the author of Native Son is trying to get across is how destructive and dangerous racism is. And so he shows us the world through the eyes of his central character, a guy named Bigger. Not even, perhaps a real name. And Bigger, he's afraid of everything. Everything is scary to him. And growing up as a black man in New York City and then finding himself accused of murder, his life is one fearful experience to the next. And when we live in fear, the world around us, I would say, stops being realistic because everything scares us, even the things that shouldn't. And so we miss out on opportunities that are there. So looking through the narrative perspective is important. In Who Killed Palomino Molero? We kind of have a third person narrator, but we also kind of see a lot of the world through Lutuma's perspective, like the interpretations we get of Lieutenant Silva. It seems a lot that even though Lutuma is presented as a third person character, a lot of the interpretations seem to be what Lutuma thinks. In Brave New World, obviously we have the third person narrator who is interested in making a lot of the points that Huxley has about the dangers of that sort of society where technology rules everything and they're trying to drain emotion out of everything, trying to drain personal commitment to anything except the world state out of everything. And, and things get dark. So those are some examples of finding a narrator. Let's see. Can the book The Uglies be good for the work they provided? I don't know anything about The Uglies, Julian. So, if you think The Uglies provides a meaningful insight into childhood or adolescence, then go for it. And before I grade it, I'll take a look at a synopsis of it. Let's see. I'm scrolling through Remind to find your questions here. You can also put questions here in the live chat if you have them. What is Estefania? Are you here? So we can answer your question. Well, even if you're not, here is your question. What is the best way to identify the narrator in a novel where there are multiple points of view? Some novels have multiple narrators. I read a novel, which the name is escaping me right now, but it was a murder. Sorry, that's the clock ringing. What is the name of that book? Okay, it's a murder novel by the British author Ian Pearce, and the name is called An Instance of the Finger Post. And it's the same murder mystery story told from 4 different perspectives. So you actually read the same story 4 times from 4 different narrators. And one of the narrators is the actual murderer. So it's kind of a neat book. In fact, now that I'm thinking about that, I might go back and read it again. It's called An Instance of the Finger Post, which is kind of a weird name, but you'll get the name. So how do we identify the narrator? Well, if the narrator is going to change, if there are multiple points of view, then you're going to have shifts. And if you're looking at a passage to analyze, like for the prose analysis question, all you need to know is who the narrator is at that point in time. If you're writing about, if the question ends up being an open-ended essay, then if you want to talk about different parts of the novel, if the narrator changes, then you would want to talk about that in your discussion. Like, okay, I'm going to talk about this, as you talk about this part, then you want to talk about, who's narrating in this part of the novel. And then if you want to move your discussion to another part of the novel and the narrator has changed, then you would want to say who's narrating at that point. What kind of clock is that? That is a clock that dates back to the 1920s. I actually have to wind it. I have to wind it once a week. There's a key that you stick in the front and you wind it one hole for the keeping of the time, and then you wind it in another hole so that the bells stay up. So I actually got it. It was a second anniversary present because that's, a clock is kind of the traditional gift. And I thought, having an old school clock would be kind of a neat thing. What is Diamond asks, what is the importance of using a frame narrative? Well, a frame narrative is a story within a story. And a lot of times you'll use it if you want to set up ambiguity or if you want to set up uncertainty. So you're going to say, well, I'm going to tell you a story that I heard from someone else, because the very act of saying, I'm going to tell you the story that I heard from someone else, you're distancing yourself from the story. You say, okay, I'm not really responsible for what I'm telling you. You're kind of suggesting, well, some of this may be true, some of it may not be true. So if you're wanting to set up uncertainty, and in a ghost story, of course, you want to set up some uncertainty in your audience. It all really depends on what your aim is with the story. Do you want maximum of suspense and possibility for shifting? Then you're going to want a less certain, a less reliable narrator. If that makes sense. All right. Okay. When the narrator is hard to pinpoint, how can I go about finding the narrator? If the narrator is hard to pinpoint, and then the narrator is not always. It's a good question. When the narrator is hard to pinpoint, how can I go about finding the narrator? Well, if it's just a third-person omniscient story, like Brave New World, the narrator's perspective isn't really all that important as far as interpretation. It is a third-person omniscient narrative. We hear what everybody's thinking. We hear what everybody's doing all of the time. There are other stories where the narrator is a lot more important. In the case of Nick with The Great Gatsby, which we talked about earlier. There are places where the narrator might be a little important, like Palomino Molero. So you have to, the more reliable a narrator is, the less important the narrator is for the interpretation. And the reason that I say that is, like most of you, if you're looking at the screen, you see me without any filters, because I'm not using Instagram. But when you set up a filter for yourself on Instagram, you're changing the way you look a little bit. And then people look at that and they're like, that's not a real person. There are filters. Okay, well, what's the purpose of the filter? You've added the filter to change something, to make yourself look different in a certain way. Maybe you want to add doggy ears or flowers or whatever else you put in the filter. Maybe you want to add eyelashes. Maybe you want to make your skin look different. So why is the filter there? And so if we go back to the question of the narrator, if the narrator is perfectly reliable, telling everything that the characters do and think and say, then the narrator is not that important as far as interpretation. But if the story seems odd in some way, like this story doesn't, ring true. Like all of those unrealistic characters in The Great Gatsby. Nobody really seems to be feeling any emotion. Is that really true, or are we seeing the world through emotional PTSD? A possibility. So that is when I would ask questions about the narrator. Let's see. I don't see any other remind questions. Let me refresh here. So, do you guys have any other questions that you want to put in the live chat? Last call. Do you have any questions about the homework that they gave you? You're writing an introduction to an essay. You're not writing the whole essay. And in that introduction, you're going to need a hook, a context, and a thesis statement. And the question has to do with the role, a novel in which childhood or adolescence plays an important role. And I suggested Brave New World, the instructions. There is a list of other books on that list. You don't have to use any of them. If you have, Julian asked earlier about the uglies, maybe. I wouldn't go with Harry Potter or The Maze Runner or any of those books that are primarily focused on adolescence. So let's see. What is my daily routine? So I get up around 6:30 or 7. I'll either spin, which is where you get on a bike that doesn't go anywhere, and I'll ride it, or I'll go outside and run for a while. I was training for a marathon that was going to be the last weekend in May, but it's probably not going to happen. So I've kind of changed my running routine a little bit for that. Then I'll grade a little bit. I'll put together the whatever materials you're going to need for the day. I'll get ready for the 11 o'clock activity. On Monday, I actually had to teach myself how to use an app called Screencastify so I could make that class. I hadn't used it before. It's kind of neat. Then we'll have the 11 o'clock class, live feeds, whatever that's over, 12:30 or 1, have lunch, do some more grading, check in, see if anybody's posted questions, work on, I'll review some of the, or check the AP board, see if they've made any updates, which they haven't. There's a big update coming Thursday night, which will have information about that Friday for you. And then take the dog for a walk around 4-ish. And then, start thinking about dinner. So in the evening, just different things, maybe watch TV, maybe play a game, maybe read. So that's the routine. The Patriots fan is, she's doing okay. She is in, she's in treatment for cancer right now. So actually today is a chemotherapy day, which is why I let the dog out. So today my routine was a little different because I got up and drove her to the doctor. Usually somebody will go in there and sit with her, but because of the coronavirus, you can't bring anybody in with you to sit. Because when you go in there to the treatment, there's a place for the patient to sit, and then there's a little bench next to them. So you can sit with them while they get their treatment. So she'll be in there half the day today and all day tomorrow. So after this, I'll go pick her up in a little bit. So what's your daily routine, Mariah? Just kidding. You can put it up there if you want. Any other questions? Check remind one more time. Also, here's a question. If you're in here and you watched the class session on Monday, the one that had the warm up and all that stuff, did you notice any glitches? Did it come through okay for you? So that would be where you would type in yes or no. Any glitches on that March 30th? Thank you, Julian. I appreciate that. Thank you, Zoe. You have a nice day too. Okay, I see no questions in Remind and no more questions here. So we're going to say last call in 10 seconds. Well, Mariah, you should be well rested then. Unless you're staying up all night and then sleeping all day. Then you're nocturnal like an owl. Okay, good. No glitches. I appreciate it. So if there are no other questions, what are we doing tomorrow? The same thing. We'll go to the live class at 11. And then there are other classes that they posted Monday and Tuesday. So if you want to watch those, the more work you do, the better off you're going to be once that test comes. So if you have some time, look at those classes too. I know that a lot of you are working, a lot of you are getting ready for other AP tests, and a lot of you are dealing with loud siblings and people around the house. So do the best that you can. But we'll see you tomorrow at 11. Friday, we'll have kind of a catch-up day. I'll come in at 11 o'clock. I'll do a little video I'll be live, and I'll talk about what they're going to do for the AP test, and I'll take questions. But Friday's kind of a catch-up day. We'll have both of the quizzes open in Socrative if you've missed it, and it's a day when if you have not turned everything in, be a good day to get everything in. So you guys stay safe, stay sane, stay virus-free, and I'll see you tomorrow.